Hello, my writer friends. Thanks for tuning into the channel today and coming back for the second episode in our series about writing with intent. I'm Mindee Arnett, fantasy and sci-fi author, and on this series, I'm telling you all the tips and tricks and tools of the trade that I have learned in my publishing journey to help you on yours. And today on this episode, we're going to be talking about getting started with writing your novel. So let's go for it. So you have an idea for your novel and you think that you're ready to start, and then you sit down at the blank in front of your computer and you stare at that blank page and nothing, right? Nothing happens. You stare at it and you go, oh my gosh, I don't know where to start. I don't know where to begin. Well, I'm here to tell you what I do to help get over that feeling, because writing a novel, first of all, is way hard. Like, don't let anybody tell you differently. Writing a book is hard. It's a commitment. It's full of self-doubt. I've heard Stephen King talk about how writing a novel is like crossing the Atlantic in a bathtub, and he's not wrong, except for the fact that I think a bathtub would probably sink, but I don't know. Maybe somebody has tested that on the internet somewhere. But regardless, it's a daunting task. I kind of think about it like standing at the top of a really, really, really steep, tall cliff and looking at the ground below and saying, how am I going to get down there? It's a little bit what it feels like. Well, I'm here to tell you that there are some easy ways to get started on actually getting the novel out there, and it's very, very, very simple. The first thing you do is you start making decisions. Now, one way to think about this, you can kind of treat your novel like going on a vacation. So if you're going to go on a vacation, you usually have a plan.
I have part of a plan.
I know when you guys hear have a plan, you think I'm possibly talking about plotting versus pantsing, and I'm actually not talking about either of those things. I'm not talking about whether or not you're trying to figure out your story structure and all the events or anything like that. I'm talking about simply having an idea about what the story is probably going to be about when you actually get it written. It's like going on a vacation. So when you go on a vacation, one of the first things you decide is, where do you want to go? Now, I don't mean when you're writing your novel that you've got to decide where your novel is going to end. Instead, you need to ask yourself, what kind of experience do you want to have as the writer, and what kind of experience do you want your readers to have when they read it eventually? Is this going to be a scary vacation? Are they going to be in a haunted house? Is this going to be a thriller? Is it going to be a romance? Is it going to be a little bit of both? You know, there's so many different things that your vacation or your story could be, and you kind of need to know what that is going into it. At least it's very helpful to know. I don't know very many people that just throw their kids and their dogs in a car and drive off and just decide where they're going on vacation somewhere. Usually you have some kind of a vague plan. You also, as part of that vacation metaphor, is you decide who's going with you on vacation. It's like having your characters and having them named. In fantasy, of course, you identify, the world and the places where it's going to take place. So while that sounds really simple for me to tell you that you just start making decisions, it actually can be a lot easier if you just break it down into little teeny tiny bites and little teeny tiny decisions, at least in the beginning. So for me, this looks like making decisions about very seemingly mundane things, like the names of places, the names of characters. Because I write fantasy primarily, I have to do a lot of world building, and a lot of the world building I do is how I generate the ideas for the rest of the story. So I start to lay down the foundation of the world in order to create the road that my characters are going to go down. And the journey that they're going to travel on is shaped by the world. So it's shaped by the rules of the magic. It's shaped by the villain and what the villains are, or the antagonists are after, what their goals are, what the protagonist is after, what kind of journey they need to go on, those sorts of things. To do this, I will literally take out a piece of paper and I will start writing down the questions that I know I have to answer in order to get started writing the story. A lot of times these are questions like, again, names. I'm kind of obsessed with names. It takes me literally forever to name almost everything in a story.
Forever.
If I'm in the groove and I'm writing, I will occasionally put in a to be determined on the name of something, knowing that I'm going to hate myself the next day when I have to come back and come figure out what that thing's going to be called. It usually takes me hours and hours and hours to decide on the name I like. And I don't mean just like, my character's name is, like in the new book I'm working on, the main character's name is Delphine. Like I don't, it's not that naming that I'm talking about. It's like names about, how my cultures are organized. So, for example, in the book I'm working on, instead of them being city-states or kingdoms or princedoms, they are going to be cantons. And it took me hours of researching on the internet and following different ideas and poking at different historical time periods to come up with this idea. And I spent hours and hours and hours doing it. And usually by the end of these sessions, I feel like, oh my gosh, I've wasted a whole day of writing. I didn't get any writing done. But in reality, all of this decision making that I'm doing about my story is helping shape the story itself, and it's helped getting me kind of revved up and ready to go on this journey or on this vacation, if we take it back to this metaphor. So it's not wasted time. And if you're not sure about what questions to start asking, make them random questions. Make them be perfectly, like, what is my main character's flaw? What do they do that drives everybody else nuts? What do they not know about themselves that they need to know before the story is over? You can start with those kinds of questions, which some of them are very, very big and you may not know, but you might be able to answer little pieces of it, kind of like little pieces of a puzzle that eventually is going to inform the whole story. So that's the first thing to do. The first thing to do is to start making choices about, quote unquote, your vacation. And then the second thing to do is start making sure that you pay attention to those decisions. Now, let me break this down for you just a little bit. I'm gonna rewind here and take you back into the history of the world, anytime before we had GPS. So before we had GPS, if you were going on a vacation, you had to go and figure out how the heck to get where you were trying to go. You'd have to go, if it was internet time, you could go to MapQuest, you could put in your address and then the destination you were going to, and it would spit out, the exact route that you had to take ahead of time. And there was none of this, avoid this oncoming traffic. There's a road closure. You slow down, there's cops. None of that. You had to just rely on this printed page. And even before that, you used to go to places like AAA and you would get a triptych, which was this rectangular booklet, and they would draw with a little highlighter. The people that worked there would highlight your path so that you could actually read the map while you were going to make sure you didn't get lost. So in those days, it was very, very, very important that you paid attention to where you were going and why you were taking this road compared to that road. And if you failed to pay attention the way my sister did on a road trip home, she was in New York and she was coming home with her good friend from a wedding. They were on their way back to Ohio, and they were not paying attention to their directions and ended up going 2 hours in the wrong direction on their way home. Then, to make matters worse, they didn't just turn around on the road that they come down and backtracked. They decided they were going to try and cut around in order to save themselves time. Now, again, this is pre-GPS. They had no Siri telling them, rerouting. There was none of that. And so they ended up taking an additional 4 hours to get home. So the point being there is that this is a lot like making decisions for your stories, that if when you're writing your novel, make your decisions and then pay attention to them. And by that, I mean, ask yourself, why? Why does the name of this town need to be this? Why does the villain want this thing that is causing the conflict with the protagonist? And when you start asking those questions, first of all, the biggest thing is that you avoid getting lost. Okay. So you avoid the story getting off track. And it also creates this more intimate relationship with your story. You know it a little better. You kind of see beneath the surface of the events in the story, and you can kind of see the bones and the architecture. And I'm completely throwing a ton of metaphors at you, but I'm sorry if you've read my writing, you're probably not that surprised. But yeah, so you got to make decisions and you got to pay attention to those decisions. And I'm going to give you another example from my own life, because I feel like, I tell you to do these things and I only tell you to do them because they're what I do and they work for me, and hopefully they'll work for you as well. But to give you an example, when I wrote my very first novel, which was an adult high fantasy called The Tempered Sword, I made decisions, but I didn't pay any attention to those decisions at all. None of those decisions were intentional. I simply decided I want to write about this character named Nessa, who is an orphan and of course is the chosen one, and she has to find a sword, and the sword is magical, and all these things that, if we go back to my last video, I'm talking about things being combustible to you. They were all combustible ideas to me, things that I loved, that I wanted to write about, but they had no business necessarily being in this story because I didn't take the time to examine those decisions and make sure that they made sense, made sure that they were interesting to someone other than me, which is a huge problem. At least it can be if I get excited about things that some people really don't care about. And, just kind of taking that very critical, careful look at your decisions. Now, I don't want you to do the opposite, where you're too critical, that you never make decisions and you kind of get paralyzed. But you do have to find that happy medium between, la, 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 I'm traveling along, and, oh, no, this is terrible, this is the wrong decision. But somewhere right in the middle is the sweet spot for getting that story written. Now, I wish I had known that when I wrote The Tempered Sword, because I just let the story dictate where it wanted to go. I let events just happen because they seemed cool or they sounded like fun, and there was no logical sense to them. There was none of that careful examination of them. And by the time I was done, not only did I have a mammoth of a novel, it was 164,000 words, which, unless you are George R.R. Martin, is way too long. It's probably the double the size it needs to be, or at least comparatively, depending on the genre. And it was terrible. It was so terrible, in fact, that my daughter just asked me recently if she could read it, and I told her no. I actually read the first couple of sentences when I was looking up how long that novel was for this video, and I was embarrassed by what I had written, probably in the same way that I'll be embarrassed by this video in about a year or so, assuming that I continue on with this successfully and get better at it. But anyways, that's not the point. So the point is that I didn't make decisions, I didn't make them with intent, and I ended up with a bad book. To make this story even worse, I wrote 3 more books after that in the exact same fashion. I had gotten it into my head, probably because of Stephen King, and his idea that, he's a complete pantser and never makes any planning decisions, whatever. I got in my head that that's how you wrote a novel, and then if you didn't do that, then your novel wasn't genuine, or wasn't going to be interesting, it wasn't going to be spontaneous, it wasn't going to be good. And that is just a load of hooey. It is not true. And once I had written 4 novels like that all ended up terrible, I finally realized it, and I sat down. Let me rephrase that. I did get better, of course, with each novel. You improve, even if you don't realize what's causing the problems in the first place. You do get better as you go along. And by the time I wrote the 4th novel and submitted it to agents, it had gotten a couple of requests for revisions, and so I was very excited, and I rewrote and made some of the revisions and sent it back into the agent, hoping to get an offer, and then of course ended up getting rejected again, which ended up being the most painful rejection I had ever been through. It was so painful that when I finally decided to start the 5th novel, I told myself that if I didn't succeed this time, I was going to quit. I kind of had my 8-mile moment, is how I describe it, do or die. Which in hindsight was really stupid, and I hope none of you ever make that decision, because let me tell you what, all of you are capable of writing a novel and getting it published, whether you do it self-publishing or traditional like I've done. Everybody has it in them to do it. You just have to simply get through those, make or break moments and make those decisions. Well, for me, that breakthrough moment was deciding that I wasn't going to write this novel pell-mell like I had done the other ones. I wasn't going to just let things happen as they may, and I wasn't going to hurry through it. I wasn't going to be impatient to get it written. I was going to take my time, examine my decisions, and make sure that they made sense, and make sure that they were right, and make sure that I was following, that I was on a journey that was going to get me where I was wanting to go. And that book ended up being The Nightmare Affair, which ended up being my first novel. And while it sounds like it was an overnight success, because when I submitted it to my agents, I got several offers within the first 2 weeks. and then ended up signing with my lovely agent, Susie Townsend. And then we did a quick revision and we went out on submission, and the book sold in 17 days. It actually sold for a trilogy. So the point being is that I spent all of this time writing these other novels in a bad way, and not in a bad way, but in a very unthoughtful, unintentional way. And that the moment I made the decision to start being intentional about it and start treating it more as much of art as it is craft, that made the difference for me. And ever since then, I'm not going to say I've sold every novel, because that is not true, but I certainly have gotten better, and I've been able to recognize easier ways to create that story and to avoid those getting lost moments, and to avoid, hopefully, coming to the end of your story and having a big pile of crap. So I guess my point being is that keep those two things in mind. If you're starting and you're stuck, not sure where to begin, start answering those questions, start making choices. And if once you start making those choices, pay attention to those choices and really start to be intentional about them, which again is kind of the whole point of this series, is that we need to write with intent. And doing that really is going to make a difference in your publishing journey. All right, guys, once again, thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. I hope for some good feedback. I hope that these will keep getting better, and I hope that you find them useful. If you do, please like and subscribe down below. Please comment. Let me know if there's something in the future you'd like me to talk about. I've got all kinds of ideas planned, including as we get back into the warmer months, I'm going to start showing you a little bit about writing about horses. If you're writing fantasy, at least generally there's horses in them, so there's going to be some kind of fun out of this room vlogs coming up in the future. But again, just let me know if there's anything in particular you would like to hear about. Send me an email. And again, thank you so much, and be sure to write with intent and live with intent. Bye.